Greetings ladies and gentlemen, my name is Max, you're watching Gamma Company Gaming, and this is a brief history of awesome. Well, by now I'm sure that the internet as a whole is aware of the sad news, but to anyone who isn't, I think you'd better sit down.
As of April 3rd, 2013, the Disney Corporation, having recently acquired the rights to Star Wars along with everything associated with it, announced their intention to all but close down LucasArts Entertainment, the Lucasfilm spin-off game development and licensing group responsible for many of my generation's best-loved games.
I say all but shut down, since Disney seems intent on achieving a, quote, broader portfolio of quality Star Wars games, because LucasArts' original IP, and are set on achieving this by shutting down the company's actual game development role, thereby making 150 employees redundant.
Its only responsibility now is to outsource the Star Wars license to third-party developers with next to no creative input. That's a great first step, Disney.
Now, essentially this is the same as stripping all the life and soul out of a body and reanimating the corpse into a hideous monster that roams the earth to feed on the flesh of the living. Except slightly less cliché and quite a lot more disturbing.
However, in fairness, it should be said that LucasArts' track record of involvement in game production, although very impressive to begin with, has in recent years been rather...
Oh dear God, the power of Christ compels you!
Also, past collaborations between LucasArts and various third-party developers have actually resulted in some of my favourite games of all time.
And so, while the sterilising of LucasArts is undoubtedly a sad event, its effects on the quality of the licence as a whole remains to be seen. And with the future of Star Wars games hanging in the balance, I feel the time is right to take a look back and recognise one of the best. This is X-Wing vs TIE Fighter. No, stop. None of that. Turns out I'm being sued by Disney for the use of copyrighted music. It's not as if I've got any money anyway.
Developed by Totally Games and published by LucasArts in 1997, X-Wing vs TIE Fighter is the third instalment of the iconic X-Wing saga, a collection of 4 spaceflight simulators set in and around the events of the original Star Wars trilogy. The saga consists of the original X-Wing, TIE Fighter, X-Wing vs TIE Fighter, and finally X-Wing Alliance.
Say what you like about Totally Games, they had a simple titling policy, and damn did they stick to it. That is unified branding in action right there.
If, unlike me, you didn't begin your gaming career in an era where DOS prompts roamed the earth, you could be forgiven for not being familiar with Totally Games, the brainchild of Lawrence Holland. A relatively big-hitting developer back between the late 80s to late 90s, they continue to develop to this day, and have been responsible for a broad range of games including the well-received Secret Weapons series, the entire X-Wing saga, as well as the fondly remembered Kirk-em-up Star Trek Bridge Commander.
Now I was going to refer to Bridge Commander as a Picard-em-up instead, but I couldn't decide which one was better. Hi-oh!
Arguably quite the impressive portfolio then.
In fact, you could say that what Totally Games doesn't know about flight sims would be impossible to hit, even for a computer. No. Look, I'm sorry, I swear to God there are no more references in the script, I promise. Totally Games took flight sims to the next generation. Look, I had to keep it fair for the Trekkies. Okay? Moving on.
So, why X-Wing vs TIE Fighter? Why not start at the beginning?
Put simply, it's the only game of the saga that I remember playing as a child, and therefore it's the one that I feel I'm best qualified to pass an opinion on.
Originally released to capitalise on the emerging demand for multiplayer capability in games of the late 90s, XVT was predominantly multiplayer focused, with a mixture of both cooperative and versus game modes, along with a variety of solo missions. In a departure from the standard format of the saga, XVT shipped without a dedicated narrative-driven campaign, whereas I'm reliably informed that X-Wing, TIE Fighter and Alliance all featured relatively engaging stories. However, in response to community demand and in a now all too unfamiliar example of game devs and publishers actually listening to their player base, LucasArts released a story-based expansion campaign for XVT called Balance of Power,
which I never actually owned and yet appears to be mandatory to get the game running on a modern machine. To eBay! What in the... how much?
Yeah, given that the expansion discs haven't been produced since the turn of the last century and the apparent common knowledge that it's needed to get the game running, it turns out that attempting to buy the Balance of Power CD is a textbook example of supply and demand just utterly collapsing.
I mean, the term seller's market doesn't even begin to cover it. This disc is so rare that I couldn't even track down a copy in this country. But here it is. In mint condition, naturally. I just hope this code is worth the price I paid. Sorry. I think everything's working. Now, just to warn you, this is an old game and I really did my best to find a way of forcing widescreen, but I couldn't get hold of a workaround for love nor money. 640 by 480 is the highest the game will run at natively, and although it does stretch to widescreen when played, the game footage is going to be cropped. You have my apologies. But enough talk. X-Wing vs TIE Fighter, let's do it.
A smooth start. Thankfully, this is one minor glitch that can be clicked past. Aside from this and one or two issues with cinematics refusing to play, the game actually runs remarkably smoothly on modern machines. Jumping in and out with Alt-Tab never caused a crash for me, and I only experienced one or two freezes while actually playing the game.
Booting up the game is always a joy for me because the music of John Williams was the soundtrack to a vast majority of my childhood. I'll be covering the use of sound assets and music in the game a little bit later on. We'll also be discovering whether it's possible to develop terminal nostalgia.
Beginning, as you might expect, with creating a pilot, you're immediately taken to the statistics screen, which is blank.
Useful.
Never fear, over time these figures will come to symbolise your worth as a pilot. All manner of statistics are recorded here, from craft-specific kills to general shot accuracy. Because nothing says fast-paced space action like spreadsheets.
To be fair, this is 95% more interesting than EVE Online ever gets, although I personally like to believe that EVE players have somehow developed the ability to assimilate raw data and process it into some form of glorious mental image, kind of like how Neo can see the code of the Matrix.
The game also allows you to view 3D models of the ships you'll encounter stateside, along with their basic stats. Not just the pilotable ones either, but all of them, and there are a lot.
Admittedly a largely minor feature, but one that's appreciated by fans such as myself.
The video and sound options are simple yet functional, while amusingly being more in-depth than many games released in the 21st century. And speaking of in-depth, the controls for XVT are just as mind-manglingly complicated as you might expect for a hardcore flight sim, although they are not rebindable. Instead, the game employs a preset command list with the ability to bind a limited number of commonly used functions to your flight stick or gamepad, resulting in an interesting, if initially overwhelming and outrageously complex, hybrid control style.
The layout is so comprehensive that I had to bind my capture key to one that was practically in the next time zone.
Thankfully, the guide I used to get the game running also contains step-by-step instructions on how to set up a compatible flight stick or gamepad, and yes, you need one of these two things to even get XVT started.
I'm not kidding. The game will actually kick your ass right back to the desktop if you dare try and play with just a keyboard and mouse.
This was less of a problem back in the day, as literally everyone who owned a computer also owned a joystick. Or at least it seemed that way.
Well, I did. It may have hurt sales just a tad.
But trust me, it's well worth dusting off your old joystick or investing in a compatible controller, as the game itself handles smoothly and responsibly. Your craft is free to move in all planes with full pitch, roll and yaw controls, allowing for pilot skill to become a major factor in the outcome of a dogfight. Put simply, the better you are, the longer you'll live.
In fact, this freedom of movement makes the core mechanic of piloting a craft highly enjoyable in and of itself.
When barrel rolling to avoid an enemy missile or slaloming between capital ships can be just as rewarding as any structured objective in the game, you know you're doing something right.
When it comes to visuals, the game is just about what you'd expect for the time.
Put bluntly, it's by no means AAA, with models and a lighting engine from the early Jurassic era. However, that is speaking from the perspective of 2013. From a practical point of view, up close you can easily tell what it is you're looking at, although at extreme distances the models tend to merge into one tiny pixelated mess. Although that is largely due to the upscaling of the screen resolution, and the targeting computer's larger image makes for a neat compromise. In a word, I'd say the graphics are functional. The aesthetic of the game, on the other hand, is one of its most positive aspects. Being developed on the cusp of full three-dimensional capability, XVT employs a mixture of 3D models for everything outside your ship, alongside detailed hand-drawn cockpit interiors and ship hulls. The result, in my opinion, is a unique and distinctly charming visual style.
So, the controls are complex yet fun to use, and you can at least tell the difference between an X-Wing and a TIE fighter. But what's the actual gameplay like?
Well, as mentioned, the game provides a variety of solo missions alongside up to 8-player co-op and versus game modes, with activities ranging from escorts or inspection duty to free-for-all dogfights, right up to all-out assaults on capital ships. Each mission has multiple stages and a tendency to escalate in intensity, giving them a good initial sense of pacing, although some missions can stretch out for slightly too long.
Imperial inspection duty is by far my favourite.
Fair to know, Manic, this is Imperial Customs Vessel Gamma 1. Do you have any fruits, vegetables or rebel scum you wish to declare today?
Piloting your ship is controlled from the first-person cockpit perspective with no pansy-arse third-person mode. At least not one that's of any use.
Nope, if you want to have any idea of who's about to give you a warhead colonic, then you need to be checking your cockpit instruments. All of them.
They can vary from ship to ship, but primarily consist of the shield indicator, shield allocator, ship designation, targeting computer, speed indicator, throttle, mission timer, subsystem indicator, laser charge, countermeasures, and ordnance complement, with above that front and rear sensors, and the heads-up display which indicates weapon range, weapon accuracy, weapon link, and whether you're under fire from a fighter, capital ship, beam weapon, or missile. Oh, and some pretty lights.
Any questions? No. Good. You'll be launching in 3 minutes. May the Force be with you.
But seriously, in the initial collection of training missions, the game does a good job of introducing and explaining each aspect of the interface to you and teaching you its uses. More often than not, you'll be asked to perform specific actions and then have their results explained to you in a fair example of tutorials done right.
So, now you know how your starfighter functions, it's time to blow away some Imperial slugs. Slash rebel scum. Delete whichever's inappropriate.
Far from being generic point-and-shoot arcade-style combat, dogfighting in XVT is multi-layered and requires a certain level of skill to survive. Choosing the appropriate mixture of damaging lasers, disabling ion cannons, or devastating ordnance is the first of many choices in a combat situation.
However, choosing the weapon is one thing. Actually hitting anything with it, that's quite another.
The game's lack of a lead indicator makes lining up shots on a moving target both as hard as hell and incredibly satisfying when pulled off correctly. Thankfully, this is less of an issue when it comes to missiles and the like as they lock onto targets. However, even this isn't quite as simple as it sounds.
That targeting computer, not just for show.
No, besides displaying statistics, its other primary function is to lock ordnance directly onto specific systems aboard an enemy ship. If you want to render your enemy motionless, you target their engines. If you want to leave them defenseless, you target their shield generator, and so on. This system is damn near mandatory for taking on enemy capital ships and pretty useful for drawing a bead on particularly agile, non-fighter opponents by stopping their arse dead.
But wait, there's more.
Your own fighter also has a set of subsystems, which can be manipulated. You can manually adjust your weapon, shield, and engine systems to boost or drain their power, in a sort of trade-off. Ship power is a limited resource, so boosting one system will leave less power for the other two. Adjusting these levels on the fly allows you to quickly prioritise aggression, survivability, or running away.
I guess you could prioritise charging towards the enemy, I suppose if you're some kind of hero, but this would have the effect of throwing you headlong into a combat situation both distinctly weakened and first. Do you see where I'm going with this?
But should you discover that no, you can't take on the whole Empire yourself?
Sorry.
The game also provides a number of advanced system controls, such as dumping all your remaining cannon charge into your shields.
A particularly useful manoeuvre to pull, especially when attempting to blow a Star Destroyer's balls off goes all pear-shaped, and you have an irrational fear of seances. Now, although XVT's gameplay is structured and its combat is engaging, the game isn't without its flaws.
Firstly, the learning curve for the control scheme is practically Himalayan, especially when it comes to combat. The sheer number of options at your disposal makes it difficult to choose the correct one in a tight situation. Should you target the next enemy, the nearest enemy to you, the nearest enemy to your mission critical craft, or the nearest friendly to the nearest enemy to your nearest mission critical craft?
Well, don't look at me, I haven't got a bloody clue.
This issue is somewhat compounded by the limited number of buttons available on your control pad or flight stick, with the necessity of reaching for the keyboard in the midst of battle becoming a distinct pain in the hole. Combine this with enemy AI that can sometimes be just a little bit too accurate, and the result is occasional moments of frantic and frustrating gameplay.
On several occasions, I found myself becoming incredibly verbally aggressive towards enemy pilots. Now that would have made the movies a very different experience.
What the fuck? Where the fuck did that come from? No, you fucking don't, you bastard! Eat shit, cocksucker!
I don't like it. Objective tracking is also an area in which the game is sadly lacking.
Ideally, you're meant to study the pre-mission map and learn the movements of every individual craft, but if you can remember even a third of the information you're given, then you're a better pilot than I'll ever be. On more than one occasion, I found myself escorting my designated mission-critical craft when...
Message from mission-critical craft. They're under starfighter attack.
Yeah. Turns out there was another mission-critical craft that I wasn't even aware of. Next thing I know...
Message from mission-critical craft. They've been destroyed. Lord Vader awaits an explanation of your performance.
Oh, and let's not forget the comm chatter. Designed to keep you up to date on wingmate and mission status, it can get insanely...
Here's one! I'm having trouble over here!
It can get
I
insane...
can't shake them! I'm heavily damaged!
The comm chatter can get
I'm finished!
See what I mean?
However, this particular issue can be remedied by reducing or removing the comm chatter in the sound options menu. Shame there isn't a dedicated button labelled Cut the Chatter.
Sorry!
And yet, despite all these problems, the game is still a pleasure to play for hours on end due to one final aspect.
The sound design, which to me is where the game really becomes outstanding.
John Williams' score is of course used throughout the game, even in the menus. However, with the addition of LucasArts' patented iMuse system, the music changes based on situational context. A common enough concept today, but rarely used to the same effect as having Williams' score spike in intensity when a dogfight starts, and having the tension ratchet up alongside it. Coupling this with the trademark sound effects from the movies that are just as recognisable and well loved as the music, results in an overall sound design that does a lot to draw you into the experience.
Cliched buzzword that it may be, immersive is the one that I would use to best describe the entire experience of playing X-Wing vs TIE Fighter.
The setting, gameplay, visuals and sound all blend together to create an experience you'll find yourself sinking deeper and deeper into. With the music reaching a crescendo and the lasers streaking past your cockpit, I defy you not to juck and jive in your seat as you desperately try to avoid being blown out of the sky.
And yes, the game may have initially lacked a storyline, but therein lies a certain level of its appeal. Well, to me at least.
A regularly overlooked quality of many Star Wars licensed games is their habit of avoiding the use of established characters as protagonists. Instead, they tend to insert you into incidental character roles where you aren't limited by an already defined mentality. You're not trying to be Luke Skywalker, you're just trying to be yourself. XVT is a prime example of this. The game inserts you into a huge universe as an utterly insignificant combat pilot, with nothing more than your wits to keep you alive, and without a destiny or any goal beyond just surviving the next mission. In my opinion, that provides an accurate depiction of life as a pilot in the Star Wars universe. And since I've no doubt that was the aim of Totally Games when they created the X-Wing saga, I'd say they did one hell of a job.
So there we have it, ladies and gentlemen, X-Wing vs TIE Fighter. Not without a few kinks here and there, but definitely one of my most fondly remembered childhood games that remains a quality Star Wars experience to this day.
Since the concept of flying starships has been one of the greatest attractions of an interactive experience in the Star Wars universe, there have been many more recent games that have iterated on the concept. However, most have felt distinctly arcadey, and none of them have really achieved the same pure sim feel as XVT. Now, in theory, with the Star Wars license available to the highest bidder, there is a possibility that the X-Wing franchise could be revisited, but realistically the likelihood is that any future games will be focused on the new run of films.
Now, what I really fancy seeing is some kind of massive open-world space flight sim trade combat tactics strategy simulator. But the chances of one of those coming along are frankly... Full conversion mod? Anyone? Anyway, thank you for watching this really quite lengthy retrospective. The series is designed just to spread a little knowledge, so if you do feel like investing in the game or digging out your old discs, then I wish you luck. You're going to need it. And the install guide I used is in the description below. If you have recently suffered any form of brain damage or you just enjoyed the video, then please feel free to hit subscribe. And if you have any feedback or advice on how to make the videos better quality or easier to watch, then by all means leave a comment. My name is Max, and you've been watching Gamma Company Gaming. Hey, Disney. You like money, right?